It's the final countdown. Do-do-do-do, do-do-do-do-do. Okay, I'll stop. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Bold Women in Business podcast. I am your host, Rachel Honeyman, and today we are up to the top episode of all time of this show. And I am not at all surprised that this was the episode that made the number one spot. The episode I'm sharing today is actually the season finale of season 2, which was longer ago than it feels like. It feels like it was just 5 seconds ago, but we've had a long summer. We've had this whole special series. So more time has passed than it seems. But this episode was really where I shared my make it or break it year. I got really vulnerable in this episode. I shared a lot of personal parts of my story that you might not know, but also talked about how I went from almost shutting down my business to getting to a place where 6 months into the year, I had hit my annual goal, my annual financial goal. And I talk about how I did that and what you can learn from that, because there's a lot that you can learn from that. So while I'm not surprised that this episode landed in a big way with people, I am very honored that people were so interested in my story. And that is a big thing that I'm hoping to focus on in season 3 is just a lot more personal stories, a lot more depth in our topics. And so we are kicking off season 3 next week. And I'm just really, really excited to share it with you. As I've mentioned a couple of times, next week I have a really special episode planned. So tune in, and I can't wait to share this episode with you again. Enjoy. Hey, beautiful human. You're listening to Bold Women in Business, the show where strategy meets soul in marketing, branding, and business growth. I'm your host, Rachel Honeyman, messaging and branding strategist, content queen, and compulsive meeting maker. Every week, I'll help you ditch the cookie cutter playbook and build a brand that actually sounds like you, sells like hell, and feels so damn good to show up for. Let's get bold. There's something I've been wanting to talk about for literally 6 months. It's July 3rd when I am recording this, and I have wanted to talk about this since January. So really 6 months. At the beginning of this year, I gave myself an ultimatum. I said, I'm either going to hit my goals, my financial goals this year, or by the end of this year, I am going to walk away from it all. I'm going to shut my doors and go get a quote unquote real job. That was the ultimatum I set for myself this year. And I said, I'm just going for broke. This is it. This year, I am doing everything in my power to make this business succeed. And if it doesn't, I am washing my hands of it. And that may sound like an extreme position to some, but it made a huge difference in how this year has unfolded for me so far. We're only 6 months into the year, and I have a lot to share. So I want to talk about this in this episode and kind of talk you through what made me make that decision, what transformation it actually had for me, and how you can learn from this idea for your own business. You don't need to set yourself such an ultimatum, but there are things that you can do in your own business that can be transformative. And so I want to share my perspective on what you can learn from this. So let's get into it. Let's just set the stage to begin with. I've shared many times already that last year I was in a really, really rough place in my business. I was working so hard to make this thing work. I was having 7,000 networking calls every week, it felt like. I had invested in a very expensive coaching program, which I would not say was a bad investment. It just didn't go quite as I had hoped it would. And I was at this point where I felt like I just sunk all this money into this business and I am not profitable. I'm pouring my heart and soul into this. I'm stressed out constantly and this isn't working. It's just not working. At the same time, and this is totally relevant because our businesses are not this like isolated thing, right? They are part of the context of our lives. So at the same time, my husband was having some issues on the job front. He had left his job and was trying to make a go at it as a consultant. It wasn't really working for him either for different reasons, but he was struggling as well. And so we were in a position a little over a year ago. We were in a position where we were literally talking about selling our house because we didn't feel like we could even afford it. We live in New York, right outside the city in Long Island, and life is expensive here. And our bills are so high. And the amount of money that we need to be bringing in just to make ends meet is more than most people are living on extravagantly in many other parts of the country. So we were just struggling to even get by. Thankfully we had a lot of savings before my husband left his job. He had been making a very high salary. We had a lot in savings. So we had a lot of cushion, but we were burning through our savings at a very scary pace. We were just looking at the trajectory and saying, if we don't take action and actually proactively downsize and change our lifestyle and potentially leave New York and go somewhere more affordable, we're going to be homeless. At the time, we had calculated we had maybe a year based on the savings that we had and the money that we were bringing in. And a year was even kind of on the outside. And I didn't feel comfortable waiting that long, obviously. Needless to say, we were in a bad place. And the financial strain that my business was putting on us, on top of the other financial strains that we had, were starting to feel like, is this worth it? I had this dream for so long of building a business and running my own business. And so many of us have that. Almost every entrepreneur I speak with shares a similar sentiment, which is, I always wanted to do my own thing. I always wanted to work for myself. And it's not just about working for yourself, right? It's also, we're all doing this for deeper meaning and deeper purpose. And there's something very powerful about that. But at a certain point, it feels like, if you're not making ends meet, is it worth it? Is it worth it? We are not building charities here. We're building businesses, and we need to pay for our lives and support our families and support our lifestyle and live the life of freedom that we want. And so many of us go into entrepreneurship because we want to feel that sense of freedom and that ease of pressure. And instead, what I was feeling is something that many, many, many entrepreneurs feel, which is this intense pressure that actually is so much worse than when you're working for someone else and taking orders from someone else and all the other things that go along with that, right? It can be actually a much higher level of pressure. It can actually be much less free in many ways. And if you're not actually making ends meet, you have to ask that question. Is it worth it? Is the juice worth the squeeze, right? You have to ask that question. So that's kind of where we were last year. And over the course of the year, things improved a little bit, but honestly, by the end of last year, I was still not in a good place in my business, largely because I had this period of time between the end of 2023 and the first, 4 or so months of 2024, where I booked not a single project, nothing. I was totally, totally dry. And so there was no money coming into my business. There was still money going out because I still had expenses for running my business. And so it was just this net negative. So it came to the end of the year and I said, my total for this year is just nowhere near where I need it to be. And this is not sustainable. This is not going to work. But there was another layer, and I think it's important to share because, again, our businesses exist for deeper meaning, deeper purpose, and they exist within the context of our lives. So something I don't know if I've shared openly on this podcast before is my infertility journey. I might have. I don't actually remember. I'm sorry. I have to go back and listen to all my podcast episodes. That'll be my summer project. So my husband and I went through 5 years of infertility treatments, maybe even closer to 6 years. And it was a very long, arduous, awful journey, really. It was awful. I wound up going through 4 rounds of IVF. We did an additional round with an egg donor. We had a combination of male factor infertility and, surprisingly, we wound up having female factor infertility. We didn't realize that until much later in the process. And after my 3rd round of IVF, I wound up having a miscarriage, very early miscarriage, which really, really just threw me for a loop. I think it changed me forever in a lot of ways. There's something about losing a pregnancy, especially when you've worked so hard for that it's devastating in a way that I think people who've never experienced it really can't understand. But everyone that I've ever spoken with who's ever experienced that understands immediately. It is so devastating. So we went through this very, very awful journey. And ultimately, for reasons I won't get into in detail now, because I don't want to get too derailed from the topic at hand, we wound up deciding to stop our fertility journey. This was a little over 3 years ago. We decided to completely put an end to our journey to trying to become parents, and other paths like adoption or surrogacy or other things did not work for us. Everyone has to make the decisions that work for them. And those were not paths that made sense for us. So we made the decision to just say, we are not going to be parents. And it's been 3 years. And this is, I'm in a much, much better place than I was. I would say the first year after making that decision, I was in a very, very dark place. I have struggled with depression and anxiety for pretty much my whole adult life. And I really went into a deep, deep, deep depression. And I wound up, going through treatment and everything and got myself to a better place. But after hitting the depths of depression, that if you've never experienced depression, you cannot possibly know what that depth of depression feels like. And I hope you never do. It's really, really, really awful. And the reason this is relevant is because besides for just I'm a person and this is part of my story, even though I always had this dream of building a business, it was actually at this point, maybe 6 months after we made the decision to stop trying to have a child, I decided to actually take the leap and start my business. I started this business when I was in the deepest point of my depression. And in a lot of ways, it was a lifeline because I had and continue to have this deep need to nurture something, grow something. And that's really where this yearning to be a mother came from. I mean, there are probably other layers to it as well, but that was a very big part of it for me. And even though in no way is a business a replacement for a child, I'm certainly not saying that, but putting my heart and soul into growing this business was a way for me to channel that need to nurture and grow something. There are so many layers of meaning to my business. And a big part of it is the people that I work with, right? I work with women who are really mission driven, really trying to make an impact. And I see my role as helping them make that impact in a bigger way. But it also had this very deep personal meaning for me. So I just gave you a lot of background context. Now fast forward at the end of 2024. So, probably about 8 or 10 months ago, I was working with my business coach. I've mentioned him before, Peter Giordano. I am a big fan. If you need a business coach, he's great. So I was meeting with him and I said, listen, I need my 3rd year in business, which would be 2025. I started my business at the end of November of 2022. Yeah, that sounds right. So my 3rd year in business, add a couple months, but I was looking at 2025 as my 3rd full year in business. This needs to be my make it or break it year. I am either going to make this business work, I'm going to hit my goals financially, or I'm going to close up shop. And the reason I gave you all that context is because I think it's important to understand what that meant, really. That meant that I was ready to give up on this thing that was so deeply meaningful to me and was in a lot of ways a lifeline, but the level of stress that it was causing, the level of financial strain that it was putting on me and on my marriage and my life really reached this point of saying, I don't know if this is worth it. And so I said, let's set some financial goals. Basically, the way I figured this out was I said, I know what I'm worth on the market, right? Quote unquote worth, right? Like, I know what I'm worth. I know that if I went and got a job as, content director or something along those lines, brand manager, whatever, right? If I went and got a job working for a company in this type of role, I know generally what my salary would be. I know what I could command as someone out there. And so I need my business to at least let me reach that. And if it's not doing that, I think this is just not worth it. I need to go get a real job, right? So he was a little taken aback when I said that, because it's not a typical thing for a business owner to say. It's not easy to say, I'm ready to close up shop, but it felt like the thing I needed to do. So that's what we did. We set the goals, we broke it down, we figured out what I would need to do to get there. And we said, okay, by the end of 2025, if I have not hit that goal, I'm closing up shop. Now, this was not a defeatist attitude. This was not I am giving up. This was a radical commitment. This is really the piece that you're going to be taking away from this. I made a radical commitment. I said, I am going to pull out all the stops and I'm going to do everything I need to do to say to myself, I know I did everything I need. I know I did everything I could to make this succeed. And if it didn't succeed anyway, okay, then I can still feel good about the work that I put in. If I went into this year neglecting the things that I had neglected before, which there were several, if I did that and then I got to the end of the year and I said, well, I know that I didn't put in all the work that I needed to make this succeed, there would always be this question in my mind. Could I have made this succeed if I had done all the right things? That was not happening. This year, I went into 2025 saying, I am going to do everything in my power to make this succeed. The outcome is not in my control. I firmly believe that. The outcome is not in my control. The outcome is never in our control, because there are so many factors that play into that. But the actions that I take are very much within my control. So here are the things that I was neglecting before. I've talked before about my content marketing. I was very much neglecting my content marketing. I would go for months without posting anything, or I was posting sporadically, or I was just constantly feeling overwhelmed by my content and not sure what to post. And it just was a mess. And I really let that overwhelm get the better of me. And I was just totally neglecting it. And so people were not seeing me constantly. They weren't, seeing me in their feeds and seeing emails from me and all of that. They just weren't seeing me. I was totally invisible. And so when people had projects that they needed help with, I was not the one that they were coming to. And I actually saw this so many times where there were people who I had, let's say, a networking call with, who I felt like I really vibed with and all of that. And they knew what I did and all of that. And then I would see months later, while I was in this super dry spell, they hired some other company to do their website. And of course, that, people are going to hire whoever they hire. But it always was like, wait, why didn't they even ask me? It felt shitty to say, like, they didn't even ask me. But in retrospect, well, they didn't ask me because I wasn't constantly on their radar. I wasn't the first one that popped into their head because I was not on their radar. They weren't seeing things from me constantly. So I wasn't going to be the first one that they thought of. They were going to think of a company that they see in their feed all the time. So I was totally neglecting my content marketing. I was also neglecting intentional networking. I was doing so many calls with people who it didn't really make sense to do calls with. I was just basically trying to fill my calendar with calls, and it was really just a waste of my time and energy and all of that. And instead, I said, I need to be much more intentional about who I'm networking with. Now, networking is not, in my opinion, just a way to find new clients, right? Probably shared this before, but I view networking calls as really a way of giving back, right? And saying, how can I help this person in front of me? And they often will respond to that and say, how can I help you in turn, right? Or they'll think of me when they hear of someone that they know who needs a brand or a website or content marketing, right? But it needs to be this act of generosity. And when I started approaching it as this act of generosity with intention and saying, this is someone who I know either might need my help down the line, or they know a lot of people who might need my help down the line. And I was really, really intentional about having these calls with very aligned people. That changed the game for me. The other thing that I neglected was I had kind of set it and forget it with my packages. So last year, I really was just focused on doing branding and web design. That was really what I focused on. And that was great in a lot of ways. It was great. It simplified things, certainly. But what I really neglected was kind of looking at where were things not working. I had this really, really high entry point, right? The only way that someone could work with me was if they needed a full brand or rebrand and website redesign. That started at a pretty high ticket price point, right? So at the time, I think I was charging $7,500 as my starting point for brands and websites. And so if someone wasn't ready for that right at that moment, well, they're not going to engage with me, right? They're not going to work with me because, I have to catch them right at the right moment. And so I had really neglected looking back under the hood of my business and saying, how can I give people more entry points to work with me and not expanding what I'm doing in a million different ways so that I'm like basically undermining my niche, right? That's not the point, but really just saying, how can I make it as easy as possible for people to work with me, right? We talked about that last week on the sales page episode, where the purpose of a sales page is to make it as easy as possible for someone to work with you. And I wasn't doing that in my whole business. I was making it really, really difficult for people to work with me. So these were the things that I was neglecting that I said, 2025, I need to focus on these things. The other thing that I was neglecting was my funnel. I didn't really have a way for people to enter the funnel and engage with me over time. So basically, that plays into all of this. But I was neglecting all of those things. And I said, I'm going into 2025. Really, I'm not going to neglect these things. I'm going to give them the focus and attention that they deserve. And I'm going all out. I'm going all out. I'm putting all the effort in that I need to make the outcome that I want a possibility. Again, not guaranteed, but it's a possibility. So I started by first relaying a foundation. I restructured my packages. I introduced new ways for people to work with me. So number one, I introduced my single scroll website option, which is generally for newer businesses or solopreneurs who don't necessarily need or can't necessarily afford a full website. They will get a visual brand, logo, patterns, colors, all of that, a brand strategy, but with a little bit more truncated version of a brand strategy. So it's not fully built out, but it gives them the bread and butter, what they need. And then a beautiful single scroll website, which is basically just one page, but really strategically designed so that it has all the things that someone really needs on their website. Obviously, a single scroll website option doesn't work for a larger brand. It doesn't work for someone who's offering very complex things that, needs more pages on their website. But for someone who just needs a landing page to build trust with their audience and really demonstrate their brand, it's perfect. It's beautiful. It works so well. And so this is like a really good entry point for people who are either just starting out, they've had a DIY brand for a while or a DIY website, and they're ready to kind of up level. And so that's a starting point. And then that's always something that can be built on down the line. But it doesn't require this like initial starting point of over $7,000, a much lower price point. I still offer my full website option, but this is a really good option. And then I also kind of went back to my roots. So I have focused on branding and web design for quite a while, but I'm actually a content marketer at my core. That's really kind of who I am. I've been a content marketer for 16 years. So I had really taken that off the roster of things that I was offering. And so I added that back in with my bold day of content, which is basically people can hire me for a day to manage their content for them and handle their content marketing and really tackle that. So that is also a much lower entry point. It's really affordable. It's a great way to kind of lift that stress off of my clients. And so I offered these new entry points for people to work with me to just really make the whole process of working with me much easier, much more accessible. So I started with that foundation of restructuring my services and packages and just making it as easy as possible for people to work with me. The next change that I made this year was, like I mentioned, getting much more intentional with my networking and my follow-ups. So really kind of leaning into the network that I have and building my network very intentionally. So LinkedIn is my main channel. I do quite a bit on Instagram as well. Mostly I just have fun on Instagram. If you follow me on there, I have a lot of fun on there. But LinkedIn is my main channel for building my network. And so I just started getting much more intentional about, first of all, looking at who I'm connected with already and seeing who are people that I haven't actually gotten to know yet that I think I should get to know, right? Who have I seen in my newsfeed that is posting really values aligned ideas and really seems like they'd vibe with me and my approach, and, maybe we can help each other. So getting intentional about that. Also getting more intentional about my follow-ups and really getting better about my follow-ups. I'm still not good at following. This is my kryptonite as a business owner, is for some reason I get super overwhelmed by following up with people. Like a message enters my inbox or my DMs or whatever, and it can take me a while to get back to people, and sometimes it never happens. So that's my admission here, is that I'm really not good at follow-ups, but I'm getting better. And that was a very intentional change. And I saw a lot of impact from getting better about following up with people. Go figure, when you actually follow up with people, the relationship deepens. So it's obvious, but for some reason, that's just a challenge for me. The most important, most impactful thing that I have done in my business, that I've talked about so many times on this podcast, but I'm going to talk about it again because it's really important, was getting really intentional and consistent about my content marketing and saying, you know what? I don't care how overwhelmed I am by the very idea of my content marketing. I know that I need to be doing it. So what I did was I said, I need to find a way to make this actually doable and manageable and feel less overwhelming, feel like less of a second job, right? A lot of times content marketing can feel like this second job that is not fun, right? For most of us, it feels like this thing that we have to do. But I said, I need to, first of all, make it fun. I need to make this an enjoyable process, and I need to really streamline the process and make this super doable, super actionable, something that I can't screw up. I can just follow these few steps and make this really doable. It should not take a lot of time out of my week. It should not take a lot of time out of my day. And I'm going to do this. So I developed a system where I'm leveraging AI. I'm a big fan of using AI to really map out my content and focus on one pillar piece of content, and then map out my content for the week, the month. And honestly, it could be much longer than that. It can be a year. I actually really map out a couple months in advance because I'm using my podcast as my pillar content. Each podcast episode is my pillar piece of content. And then I repurpose that into many pieces of content to post in the places that I need to be talking to people. But because my podcast is my pillar piece of content, I have a season basically planned out. Sometimes I leave little gaps to fill in as needed, but for the most part, I have 15 episodes planned out in advance. So we're talking really, one episode a week. This is a few months of work, right? It's close to 4 months of content that is at least loosely mapped out. And then each week gets mapped out much more specifically, obviously, but it's done in such a way that it takes much less time. It takes much less effort. And I can sit down for an hour and just knock out my whole week's worth of content. It's really simple. It's really easy. And this is something that I taught in a workshop recently, and I'm actually in the process of putting the finishing touches on selling that system in a super low ticket. It'll be super affordable. I want this to be very, very, very accessible for people because it's so game changing. It's so life altering in a huge way. It really changes how you approach the content side of things in your business. And it totally transforms this from being this thing that we dread to being something that feels really fun and aligned and manageable. So stay tuned because I am finishing up the little pieces of that, and I will be sharing it very soon. Really excited to share that when it goes live. So this year, the biggest thing that I changed in my business was getting super intentional about my content marketing. And I show the fuck up now. I show up. I am everywhere that I need to be. I'm not everywhere though, right? That's a key thing. You're not going to find me on Twitter or X or whatever it's called now. You're not going to find me on Threads or on TikTok. You're not going to find me on the channels that A, I don't want to be on, and B, my audience is not hanging out there. I am primarily on LinkedIn, Instagram, and email. Like those are the three places that I'm talking to people. And then my podcast is this anchor that anchors all of my content. So this is the main place that people are hearing from me. And then they continue to hear from me through LinkedIn and Instagram. And if you're on my email list, then you are hearing from me there as well. If you're not on my email list yet, go join, go sign up. Quick pause. Can we talk about content for a second? If you're staring at a blank screen more often than you're hitting post, it might be because you're trying to create content that doesn't fit your actual strengths. It's kind of like wearing someone else's jeans. They may look super good on your friend, but you put them on and they are not comfortable and they just aren't doing your butt any favors. That's why I created the Content Marketing Power Type Quiz. It's free and it helps you figure out the kind of content you were made to create. The kind of content that feels natural, sustainable, and actually connects with your people in a way that lights you up. In just 45 seconds, or maybe even 30 if you're quick about it, you're going to find out your power type and get custom recommendations to make content feel easier and more effective. Head on over to honeybebold.com/quiz. That's honeybebold.com/quiz. Take it and then DM me your result because I kind of need to know. All right, let's dive back into the episode. Okay, so we have laid the groundwork. What was the situation that made me say, this is my make it or break it year, I'm going for broke, I'm doing this? What did that actually mean? And then what did I change in my business to actually make that happen? All right, now let's get to the part that you actually want to hear about, which is results. We are 6 months into the year. Like I said, it's July 3rd when I'm recording this. So we are basically exactly 6 months into the year. And I have hit my goal, the goal that I set for the entire 2025. I've hit it already. And I am on pace to far exceed it. Needless to say, this shit works. It really works. When you put in the effort in an intentional and consistent way, it pays off. So I went from, I think I need to close my business because I'm not making enough money in this business to justify the expenses that I have. And the expenses are high. The stress is extremely high. Like it's not easy to run a business. I love it, but it is stressful. And especially when you're not bringing in enough money, it's really stressful. Really, really, really stressful. So I went from saying the juice is not worth the squeeze to saying I'm 6 months into the year and this is definitely worth it, right? And let me tell you another thing. Shockingly, maybe it's not so shocking. I don't know. 6 months ago, me would have been shocked to hear this. A year ago, me would have been shocked to hear this. I am less stressed now in my business than I was a year ago. Like considerably less stressed. I feel like I have a handle on things. I feel like I know what I'm doing. And a year and a half ago, everything felt like it was happening by chance. All of my business came through word of mouth, pretty much. Pretty much all of my business came through word of mouth, through referrals, which is great, right? I will never say no to a referral. They're great. The problem is that there are limits to that. You're waiting for someone to say, oh, let me refer someone to Rachel. Let me send my friend her way. Let me send my colleague her way, right? You're relying on someone else remembering you, thinking of you, and sending people your way. And many of those people may not be good fits for what you offer. They might not be in the right price range. They might be totally misaligned. But regardless, you're just sitting around waiting for business to come your way. And that's not a very sustainable business model. So I was sitting around waiting for business to come my way, and it wasn't working. And, occasionally I would have business come in, right? Besides for that 5-6 month period where I really didn't book any business. Again, halfway through the year last year, things started to trickle in. And what made me craziest, what made me the most stressed about it was saying, I have no idea how to recreate this. I have no idea how to make this happen again because it's just happening by chance. I just am getting lucky. I got lucky. I had a few months of getting lucky where work just kind of came my way. You can't artificially create luck, right? That's not how it works. So now in my business, yes, I'm spending far more time, although actually I'm not sure if it's more time or not. It probably is. I'm spending more time on intentionally marketing my business through my content marketing. But the result is that I feel like I have some control over what comes my way. Again, I don't control the outcome fully, but I control my actions that can lead to the outcomes. And we know for sure, I know for sure, if I was not doing my content marketing, if I was not consistently putting out my podcast and consistently posting on LinkedIn and consistently posting on Instagram and consistently emailing my list, if I wasn't doing those things, I know what the outcome would be. I would be sitting around waiting for business to come my way. Now I know that I'm doing what I need to do to get my name out there, to tell people what I'm doing, to be really clear about what I offer and the transformation that I make happen for my clients, and business comes my way. But it doesn't come my way by accident. It doesn't come my way by chance. I know that the effort that I'm putting in is leading to people coming my way. That is such a different feeling. That is such an empowering feeling to feel like I have some control here. I am not just sitting around waiting for business to come my way. And that is the power of intentional content marketing. It doesn't happen overnight. It's not like, oh, I started posting consistently and within 4 weeks, business was flooding in, right? That's not what happens. But I've been really, really consistent and intentional for about 6 months, and business has been coming in, not quite from the beginning, but I would say from about, if I started this in January, from February on. It didn't take that long. It really didn't take that long for me to start seeing results. So when you are consistent and intentional about your content marketing and you're making it fun, because if you look like you are dreading it, if you look like you're hating everything that you're putting out there, it shows. The biggest feedback that I get from people is, Rachel, you look like you're having so much fun. And I am. I'm having a really good time. I'm really enjoying this process because I'm saying, you know what? I took the pressure off of me. In a lot of ways, saying this is my make it or break it year, it sounds like that would be putting more pressure on myself. But it actually removed the pressure from me because I said, what's the worst that can happen? The worst that can happen is that at the end of this year, I close up shop and I go get a quote unquote real job. And yes, that is a really hard pill to swallow. But saying that I know that that is a choice. That is a choice that I'm making. I'm choosing to put my all into this and make it succeed. And if it doesn't, it's not in my control. I did all the things in my control, and maybe this is just not meant to be. That is comforting to me. And that removes pressure for me, actually. So with my content, that really comes through because I'm not putting pressure on myself. I'm saying, I'm only going to put out content that feels super mega aligned and that feels like me, that feels like a reflection of the brand that I want to build. It's not content that I feel like I have to be putting out. Actually, one thing that I have continued to neglect and hopefully will stop neglecting soon is I have not published a blog post on my website in, I don't know, probably a year. I'll have to go check, but it's probably a year. Not because I think that blogging is not important. Blogging is super important. It is a super crucial way to continue driving traffic to your website, to continue building your thought leadership and your authority. I think it's really important. But for me, because I am focused on all these other aspects of my content marketing, trying to do the blogging side of things as well felt like I was forcing something. And there was a time when I was blogging more consistently, and I have some good blog posts, don't get me wrong, but there was a lot of times it felt like I was just trying to write something for the sake of writing something. I was trying to publish a blog on a schedule for the sake of publishing a blog on a schedule. And that did not feel aligned to me. That did not feel fun to me. And so that's really something that I've focused on is I've said, I'm just going to do what feels fun, aligned, and really is intentional in how I'm reaching my audience, talking to my audience, and getting them to see what I do and helping them understand what I do and how I can help them. So that is the power of intentional content marketing, is that it's really the way that you can continue to show up for your audience and help them see who you are as a brand, and what you can do to help them. And if you're not consistently putting that out there, they'll never know. And they're not going to think of you. Even if you tell them once, 6 months from now, when they need whatever it is that you offer, they're not going to think of you if you haven't been consistently showing up for them. That is your job, is to show up for them consistently. My job is to help you do that. So here's what I want you to take from this experience that I had, this going for broke, right? What can you take from this? Because you don't need to say, this is my make it or break it year, I'm going to shut down my business if this doesn't work. You don't need to do that. But what you can do is really think about, where are you holding yourself back in your business? Where are you getting in your own way because you're putting pressure on yourself that you don't need to be putting on yourself? Because you feel confused or unsure or overwhelmed? Where are you getting stuck? And do you need help with some of those things? Because that was a big piece for me as well. I mentioned that I worked with this business coach. He's still my business coach. But I said to myself, I need an outside perspective to help me tackle this problem. I need an outside perspective to help me figure out, what are the steps I need to take to really change my business fully. I need to change it completely. Now, I already had a strong brand. I already had a lot of the pieces in place. I didn't actually overhaul my business completely, but I needed to change my experience in my business fully. It needed to change from this thing that was causing tremendous stress and strain to something that really did fulfill that need of mine to nurture and grow something, and to do so in a very values aligned way, and to build this thing that I just feel so proud of. I'm so proud of the business that I'm building and the brand that I'm building. And more than that, I'm proud of the impact that I am able to help my clients make as a result of building this brand and business. Because when I was staying invisible and quiet and not showing up, I wasn't able to help as many clients achieve the impact that they can achieve. So really think about, where are you holding yourself back? What challenge could you set for yourself? Even if it's not, I'm going to shut down my business by December 31st, if XYZ, right? You don't need to do that. But what is the challenge that you are going to set for yourself to really propel your business to the next level? Is it, I'm going to commit to posting consistently on LinkedIn, and consistently could mean once a week, right? Is it, I'm going to really take a look at my brand? Is my brand all over the place? Do I need help really refining that and making sure that my brand comes through clearly, not just in your logo and visuals and all that, but your messaging, your website, your content marketing, all of it should be sending the same message to your audience and really showing your audience who you are and what you stand for. And do you need to take a look under the hood and refine all of that? Whatever challenge you set for yourself, I want you to come away from this episode. I hope you're feeling fired up, because I feel fired up. This has been such a transformative experience for me and for my team and for my business. And I think it can be for you as well. So if you're feeling stuck, if you need help, if you want to spitball some ideas, shoot me a DM on Instagram or LinkedIn, wherever you hang out. Send me an email at hey@honeybeebold.com. I would love to chat. I would love to hear from you. And I'd love to hear where you're feeling stuck in your business, what I can help with. And let's see how we can really change your business for the better. All right, beautiful human. That's a wrap on this episode of Bold Women in Business. This episode was brought to you by my company, Honey Bee Bold, with music by Shmukulele. But before you go, don't forget to take the Content Marketing Power Type quiz at honeybeebold.com/quiz, because when your content fits your power type, showing up gets way easier and your marketing actually starts working for you. Until next time, stay bold, stay kind, and keep doing it your way.